whose perspective of history are you consuming?
Absolutely.
Is first thing. Second thing, whose perspective of history is even available?
1494. This was the point when European countries, mainly Portugal and Spain,
Mm-hmm.
they had started developing their navies.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what this Treaty of Tordesillas, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, please check it. What they did was the Spanish king and the Portuguese king, they met and they drew an imaginary line on the world map. They said, you will be colonizing the left half, I will be colonizing the right
Right.
half. And they went ahead with that.
The example that you made about like the book which
Hmm.
portrayed India in a very horrific way,
Hmm.
for the people who were reading it in Britain,
Hmm.
who have never been to India, for them that was the only source of truth.
Exactly.
They did
Exactly.
not have it, and for them maybe it was not feasible to come to India and see on their own.
Ha.
And maybe even if they would, they would kind of have a bias already.
What I believe happened due to these world wars and what I believe happened as a byproduct of emerging independent nations
Mm-hmm.
is that these nations, people over there, finally gained the understanding and the confidence
Mm-hmm.
to write their own literature. A lot many times challenged whatever the dominant narrative was till then about.
Mm-hmm.
And they added certain nuances that made history more fairer and more objective. But few years later, this notion was challenged. They said there are no concrete evidences to claim that this was the product of an invasion because largely throughout the Harappan sites there are no signs of struggles. There are no weapon hoards. There are no dead animals that show the signs of war. It was just one skeleton that was found in an odd position that led to a very odd theory. And when this notion was challenged, it was accepted that the dead man's alley or the invasion theory is wrong. As an example, again, the Harappan script has not been
Yeah,
deciphered till
exactly.
date.
Exactly. That's true. It has not been. Okay, so this is where the interesting part comes into. Do you think AI would be able to decipher it ever? Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode of the Deep Philosophy Group. Today we are yet back with a new guest of ours. I would like him to introduce to you who he is.
I Kant.
You can't. You're done with life.
I am.
So not Immanuel Kant. It's I
I
Kant.
Kant.
I Kant. Nice, nice. So if you want to know more about what exactly we are gonna do, if you're new to this channel, the other guy will help you understand what it is. Hi, so if you're new to this channel and if you don't know what exactly are we gonna do, so here you can see there are a lot of cards, and in each card we have some prompt, and each prompt can say anything. It can be like, are humans unique in universe, or is art timeless or context specific? So there are these open-ended and opinion-based things that we'll talk about, and I'll just give these cards to the person who is with me. They will choose a card and we'll talk about that. What your job is to just talk about the opinions in the comment section and also talk about the opinions of ours that we'll discuss in this particular thing. So that's all. Now you can start with the game. Cool. So now that you understand what we are going to do, so without wasting too much time, we'll start with the process. You have to choose one of the things and we'll give you a false belief of free will.
I have centrist tendencies, so
Pick right. Good. Can we trust historical accounts?
damn,
Nice.
this is interesting.
Nice. So, okay, so how we generally go about it is we pick each word and try to give our definition so that we are on the same page when we are discussing about it. So, let's take the first word, which is trust.
Trust.
How do you define trust? What is trust according to you?
Trust, I believe, is probably the state where when you're said or told something,
Hmm?
you would not bother to verify it with a third person. You would not bother to check up on resources or just go to ChatGPT or Google perhaps for that matter and try to find more about it. That is a very, I'd say, a very objective definition of trust for me. And if we talk about human relationships, their trust, I guess, assumes a different meaning, slightly different meaning.
Basically, something you can believe blindly. Is blindly the right word over here?
I think yes, because yes, I think yes.
Okay.
Blindly is the right word here.
Okay, so believing something blindly is something we can call trust.
Trust.
Okay, my definition of trust is kind of similar. I think there's one more thing on the trust, because there's one thing where you have the trust on facts and figures. There's one trust which you have on people.
Yes.
On people, I guess the trust definition kind of changes. It is, maybe they are wrong, but maybe their intentions would be correct of doing that thing. For example, I trust my parents. The actions of my parents can be wrong at times, but I never judge or doubt their intentions. But I trust my parents.
Yeah.
So maybe that is also like one slight other spectrum of trust altogether. So one is facts and figures, one is people. Historical accounts. How do you define historical accounts?
I think it's mostly talking about journals, books, whatever accounts our travelers have left. So archaeological records. I don't think it's the archaeological preserves per se, but the interpretation of them, because there's a lot of difference. So
I thought like the first one would be something that you would trust more rather than the latter one.
the archaeological preserves.
I guess yeah, that is more
Huh,
believable
of
as
course,
compared to the
but then
interpretation.
again,
Acha, you are defining historical accounts.
yes.
Okay.
Huh.
Fair point. Fair point. So historical accounts, according to you, are the
interpretations of whatever
historians.
remains,
Okay.
whatever remains we have till date.
Or what we have found till date. What we have found till date. Fair point. According to me, also, yeah, historical accounts are largely the interpretations of the people. Generally, what people, because let's say, even about pyramids, people have a lot of theories. About any archaeological thing that people found, they have a different kind of theories. So those are historical accounts. I think interesting thing about historical accounts generally is that you have different pictures of that thing.
Absolutely.
You have different perspectives of it. Okay, cool. So now comes, can we trust historical accounts? So what's your take?
I'll first start off, like, of course, there are both sides, I know, but I'll start off with what I largely believe in, and I think yes, I think we can trust, given there's
the interpretations.
Given there's a certain consistency when you read across sources.
Okay.
So, for example, I'll just talk at a very basic level. So, in India, our curriculum textbooks are basically the NCRTs, okay, largely. Or state boards have their own textbooks, but they pass through a process. And the process is usually that they take people who are experts in subject domains. So, for example, history, polity, geography, and they bring them together, use their knowledge, and also even these people, they refer to multiple sources. They refer to multiple books. They refer to biographies, autobiographies. They refer to plain manuscripts. They refer to a whole lot of different records. And then they make their judgments and write things that they believe largely hold consistent.
Okay.
So that, I think, is a scientific process, that you have taken a lot of information, you've gathered so much information, you've extracted a chunk out of it, and now you're presenting it as something that is general or generally believable.
Okay.
So it's more like in anthropology, there are two processes with which you conduct studies, right? General to specific and specific to general.
Okay.
These are the processes of making your theories. So I
just
think
one thing. Can the audience trust whatever you're saying?
I think they can, but again, it's up to them.
If you don't, you can just Google it or ChatGPT.
Of course,
But yeah,
you can.
I just wanted to give you a
Disclaimer.
Yeah. Yes, we can maybe trust him. Please, yeah. Now continue.
So that's what I was saying. So I think that process will become specific to general, not general to specific, because you picked specific records, you picked specific books, and then you obtain chunks to bring out a general trend that has been consistent throughout time frames, throughout sort of history.
But over here, I guess one very interesting thing comes into the play. You said for Indian school goers, or like when we attain our initial stage of knowledge, that is governed by CBSE or NCERT, CBSE largely. CBSE Central Board of Secondary Education in India. But don't you think that whosoever is in the political power in that tenure kind of dominates or affects?
Absolutely,
what
they tend
is
to, and this is a tendency that has been seen time and again. But now here comes two things. One is that sort of a writing is in fact easily identifiable,
okay.
but somebody who is below 16-17 years of age, or rather I'd say even 20 years of age, it's very difficult for that person
For difficult what?
to identify whether the writing has a certain bias in it or not.
But that is the thing. It's not on them to know about it.
Exactly.
But don't you think that even when they do not have the ability to identify this thing, they are kind of being given a partial information, or in some cases maybe wrong
That is
information?
what is problematic.
Okay,
That
so
is
you address that. Okay.
yes. So that is what is problematic, and that is why I'm saying so. While it is easily identifiable, it becomes problematic because the audience to which it is being given,
they cannot even identify.
They cannot identify the bias. Let's say somebody who has graduated and somebody who has read so many texts, or gone through a rigorous academic process, they will be able to identify. They will be able to see, and they'll be able to rather have a very neutral picture of whatever book, whatever textbook they come across.
Okay.
So there's this book. When we read history, Indian history, Vincent Arthur Smith is the author. What he wrote when this person was an imperialist.
Okay.
He came with the British India Company, and this was the initial phase when the British India Company was consolidating their power, and they started to decided to interpret Indian historical accounts and Indian history. Interestingly, this guy, the book that he wrote, portrayed India in a very negative light.
And when was it written, according to you?
I think it
Before
should be something around the 1800s.
Okay, when the British era was on the peak.
So 1757 was Battle of Plassey. Okay, so after that they started gradually consolidating, and I think by 1800s, 1810 something, I'm not sure of the year, I think this book came out. And he portrayed India and Indians in a very negative light. So Namaste London, there's a movie, there's a line, snake charmers, land of snake charmers. That is verbatim there in that book. Okay. It's a land of snake charmers. It's a land of unclean people, whatever negative bias you can think that there is. So if somebody, let's say, is in that time, and somebody who's, let's say, sitting in London, sipping their English tea, whatever, and they do not have any idea of India because very little was written about India till date, that too in English, and they decide to pick up this guy's book, they'll have a horrible picture of this country, or a horrible picture of whatever the idea of India was at that point of time. That is a textbook danger of having information that is plagued or biased. Okay, so in that manner, that is why I say that if your derivation passes from a scientific process of reading multiple texts. So let's say if somebody read this Vincent Arthur Smith's book, but at the same time they decided to read Orientalist books or Indologist historians' books, they would then have a very different picture, and they would then be able to identify, this person, Vincent Smith, has written in a certain style and in a certain manner which is not consistent with the other sources, right? So that is how you are able to identify biases, and that is how you're able to see if you have to trust some source or not.
But again, you need to have certain level of I don't know, critical thinking to do that.
Absolutely.
Because you know what, that's actually the beauty of it. Because the example that you made about
Hmm.
like the book which
Hmm.
portrayed India in a very horrific way,
Hmm.
for the people who were reading it in Britain,
Hmm.
who have never been to India, for them
Hmm.
that was the only source of truth.
Exactly.
They did
Exactly.
not have it, and for them maybe it was not feasible to come to India and
Ha.
see on their
Ha.
own.
Ha.
And maybe even if they would, they
Hmm.
would kind of have a bias already that okay,
Exactly. Yes.
see, and that is where I guess also the confirmation bias
Hmm.
comes into play. Let's
Hmm.
say 60% of India is very good, but 40% of India is bad. So they would say, okay,
Hmm.
only this is the
Hmm.
right thing.
Hmm.
That is not the right thing because there's a confirmation bias over
Hmm.
there. Because this is where our question also leads us. Can we trust historical accounts? Because one of the biggest points over here is that whose perspective of history are you consuming? Is
Absolutely.
first thing.
Hmm.
Second thing, whose perspective of history is even available?
Hmm.
Because even if you want to see the other perspective, is it even
Hmm.
available?
That's true.
Maybe I would be very wrong to speak about it right now, but I really wish that we could have more literature which could define what and why Hitler did.
Huh.
I am
I can
not saying if he
understand.
was
Huh.
right
Hmm.
or wrong or
Hmm.
anything, because if thing that we call as history is written by the victors,
Hmm.
there must be a lot of wrong things that Winston Churchill did.
No, but I think there's something like with his actions, there's something very clear that okay, what he did was absolutely wrong and
Yeah,
horrible.
agreed.
Yeah, but of course, I get the sense what you're trying to say is that there should be something that helps us decipher what went on in his mind,
Exactly.
right? What certain biases
Hmm.
and what led them strengthening to that level where he was certain that Jews are, a
Hmm.
race to be
Or
exterminated.
any race, any race.
Exactly, any race except the so-called idea of Nazis.
Hmm. Because you know, my point is, I completely agree that he was wrong. Whatever
Hmm.
he did was wrong.
Hmm.
But that does not define that whatever the other party did was right. They, still, there are so many things that are kind of hidden or eradicated of what US did wrong
Hmm.
in the World War II or
Hmm.
what UK did wrong in the
Hmm.
World War II. We
Hmm.
still have no idea.
Hmm.
I still know that when what was the name of that trial? Nuremberg
Nuremberg
trial.
trials. Huh.
In that, Japanese king was also
War
called in.
criminals.
Yeah, but he was not given any
Hmm.
sentence
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
was believed that, again, it's maybe it's a conspiracy theory
Hmm.
or whatever it is, that uh, give all the biochemical or bio tests that you have done on the US
Hmm.
army
Hmm.
folks,
Hmm.
give the results to us, we will
Hmm.
not pull you in.
I haven't heard of that,
Again,
but
it's a late night Reddit theories
I
that you
can
read.
agree that there must have been political reasons.
Exactly.
There must have been certain reasons because whatever the Western powers do, usually there are very conspicuous reasons behind that.
Exactly. And again, this is again where the can we trust the historical accounts comes into
Hmm.
the play. The entire Nuremberg trial,
Hmm.
I still feel that okay, it was right, it was supposed to be done, but
Hmm.
was everything which happened in Nuremberg trial told to us?
And in the first place, my question is, did they really have an authority to conduct a trial?
Exactly. Like just for the sake that you have won the war,
Exactly.
you have again. I'm making a point over here that I might be wrong, but it doesn't give you the power to hold a trial
Exactly.
altogether.
Exactly.
And the trial in which the deciding parties are completely of the country which are the winning one.
Huh, so I'm going on a very different timeline
Trajectory.
here,
Uh-huh.
but I'll give you a very similar example. So, 1494, um, this was the point when European countries, mainly Portugal and Spain,
Mm-hmm.
they had started developing their navies.
Mm-hmm.
The English power was still, I'd say, it was on the rise. It was still not that big of a power to be, reckoned with.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what this Treaty of Tordesillas, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, please check it. What they did was the Spanish king and the Portuguese king, they met and they drew an imaginary line on the world map. They said, you will be colonizing the left half, I will be colonizing the right half. And they went ahead with that. And they went ahead with that without any consideration of whatsoever what those lands would have, what would the people of those places would want. And today, when you think about it, like very few people know that these things at this level were happening, because again the focus shifts to the bigger, more polarizing events in history, like the world wars, like the Holocaust, and the Industrial Revolution and whatsoever. But even these small events, such treaties and whatever, they reveal certain sense of biases. So what do you think, again, what was in their minds, in the Portuguese and the Spanish king, that they thought that we have the authority to decide what the entire world wants? And oh yes, there was one more component to it. There was a mutual understanding that whichever part is colonized, they'll be converted to Christianity.
But don't you think it is again very analogous to what is kind of happening today also geopolitically? It's maybe now it's US and China
Yes,
who,
yes.
or maybe Russia also, who are
Yes.
deciding who will rule which part
They
of the world.
try to, but thankfully I'd say that after both the world wars and the Second World War specifically, it did something good and it did something bad. The bad part, of course, was the millions and millions of deaths that happened, war casualties, whatever. But the good part was that the economies of these countries were absolutely shattered.
Which kind of signals that war is
Yes.
of no good to anybody.
And which also meant that newer countries, emerging democracies or emerging countries, the independent countries, would then finally have a chance to dictate what their future would look like. So
Partially.
Partially, of course, but then, even that bit of say, I would say, matters a lot.
It's still a bigger progress from the past.
Because so, of course, Britain had a lot of reasons to leave India. The non-cooperation, the entire freedom struggle was a very significant part. And as to what contemporary belief is that Gandhi had no part to play, he was a huge role. And so were the other freedom fighters, Netaji Subhash Bose, whatever. They had a big role to play. But added to that was the fact that after the Second World War, Britain's economy was completely broken. And they could not afford to run India anymore.
Or any colony.
Because any colony for them. Yes, exactly. So they had to leave. Now that gave us an opportunity. And I think this country, more or less, has seized that opportunity.
Fair point. Okay, I get it that after the entire this World War II learning, it is completely understandable that now the countries' bigger economies are not getting into the bigger wars. But don't you think that now they are going into the proxy wars, like China and like this Russia keep on getting into the proxy wars. Like it's Ukraine, Russia is one of the proxy wars. Vietnam was one of the proxy wars. Cuba was one of the proxy wars. What do you think? What is your take on that?
I think, of course, and that is a very natural byproduct of geopolitics, I'd say. Sounding at the risk of being very insensitive, but I think that's the natural course of action. But coming back onto our theme and our objective of this discussion, what I believe happened due to these world wars and what I believe happened as a byproduct of emerging independent nations is that these nations, people over there, finally gained the understanding and the confidence to write their own literature. That a lot many times challenged whatever the dominant narrative was till then about. And they added certain nuances that made history more fairer and more objective. And that is why I believe that as many interpretations as we get of historical records, they will just add to our understanding. And of course, they may also confuse somebody, but it's about getting those 5 out of 7 correct. Right?
Fair point. Basically, you have more data now
Exactly.
to process. You have more perspectives.
Exactly. I'll just give you an example of something that happened with the Harappan civilization excavations.
Okay.
So when the Harappan civilization excavations, I think in Mohenjo-daro only, excavations were happening, they found a skeleton in an alley. And in that alley, no other skeletons were there. And the placement of that skeleton was very odd. Like usually the Harappan civilization skeletons, they were buried in a certain manner and in a certain direction, but this was like totally different. And the placement was also very weird. It felt like that, you know, that person had somehow just dropped dead on that same spot. And when the skeleton was analyzed, they also found blade remains on that person. And they named the alley the Dead Man's Alley, the entire place. So based on that, the historians of that point, they made a theory, and since at that point the reasons for the end of the Harappan civilization were not known, so they made a theory that the Harappan civilization ended due to foreign invasion. And who were the foreign invaders at that point? Most probably the Aryans, right? People who came from the Iranian steppes. So that was the dominant theory. And again, since to validate that, what they also saw was that in the early Aryan period, a lot of the artifacts, they were consistent to some extent with the Harappan artifacts. So what they thought was that the Aryans came, they exterminated all the Harappans because the Harappans were a trading society, had no standing army. So it was pretty easy for them. And then they took over the whole thing. And gradually they moved on to India, leaving the sites behind. But few years later, this notion was challenged. They said there are no concrete evidences to claim that this was the product of an invasion, because largely throughout the Harappan sites there are no signs of struggles. There are no weapon hoards. There are no dead animals that show the signs of war. It was just one skeleton that was found in an odd position that led to a very odd theory. And when this notion was challenged, it was accepted that the Dead Man's Alley or the invasion theory is wrong. So you see how, based on data, based on interpretation, based on thought, our idea of an entire civilization's end changed completely.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, because that is something which takes me. Okay, let's just do one thing. Let's just conclude our topics also, because that is where my point will also come into the play. Okay, so based on the entire conversation that we have had, how would you like to conclude in 2 or 3 sentences? Can we trust historical accounts or not?
I think yes, you can, but there are caveats. You'll have to do some hard work. You'll need to apply some sense of your own. You'll have to refer multiple sources, unfortunately. But once you find that the findings are consistent within a lot many sources, and sources that are probably preferably from different periods or different authors with different leanings, and also while checking that they are not derived from each other, again I said that it is hard work. But once you do that and once the findings are consistent, I think you can trust them. I think you can trust whatever is consistent across these.
Fair point. Got it. Now this is where my conclusion comes into the play. So my conclusion is in layers. The first layer is that, first of all, have we found all the history yet or not? Have we been able to discover all the history yet or not?
Has everything been recorded properly?
No, recorded is still the second part. First thing is, have we been able to even find it? Like finding and then recording. Recording
exactly.
is the second step. Have we found everything? So most of the things which is before our civilization, maybe we have not even found it yet.
Yes.
Okay, because still most of the things about pyramids, Harappan civilization, as you mentioned, it's still unknown. We do not, because we have not found most of the things yet. Maybe after more excavation, more things will come out, more theories will come out, and again different interpretations will come out. So first layer is that. Second layer is, was it recorded? Third thing, was it recorded properly? The fourth thing is that how many perspectives to that recorded thing about interpretation are.
Of course.
So,
even then, it may be impossible at times to figure out, because, as an example again, the Harappan script has not been deciphered till date.
Exactly, that's true. It has not been. Okay, so this is where the interesting part comes into the. Do you think AI would be able to decipher it ever? Do you think AI would be able to help in the deciphering process?
I don't think so, because AI, again, it runs on
The data
the
that we have.
crawling method. It crawls the data on the internet, and then it finds whatever is relevant to you.
But
And
that
everything that it will crawl
uh-huh.
has already been worked upon by some human. So while the process may be faster, of course, the process of finding similarity. So let's say, if as a layman I today decide that I have to decipher the script,
Mm-hmm.
so the AI would definitely will help me come closer
Mm-hmm.
At a very fast pace.
Mm-hmm.
But would it know more than a scientist who has been working on the same thing for years? I don't think so.
Yet.
Yet.
That is an interesting
Claude.
part. Fair point. Fair point. Cool. Cool. Perfect. So that was all the conclusion. That what the entire conversation was about. What do you think about the question? Can we trust historical accounts? Do let us know about that in the comments. Also, like, if in the entire conversation you had any of the opinions or our opinions or like any of the things that we said, if you have any answers to that, please timestamp that point and give us the answer in the comment section. Also hit the like button if you like this conversation, share it with your friends, hit the subscribe button, and there are some more conversations like this on our channel which keep on coming with equal or unequal intervals because of my own um, laziness or discipline issues, but yeah, it keeps on coming.
Commitments.
Not it's my commitment with my laziness that is affecting the schedule over here. But yeah, okay, cool. So you will find more videos. We have also been posting the shorts and reels on Instagram, so you can just have a look at that. Also, I'll put the link to the
Use those shorts and reels to rage bait your friends. Since this is history, I know a lot of them will be very sensitive.
If you really have to rage bait people, I guess the entire channel is all about that. The entire channel is about rage baiting the people. I have completely been running this entire podcast on the concept of rage bait, to be honest, but still people are not being baited to come to this channel. Someday they would be. I just feel that this channel will be famous someday suddenly when I'll be a famous personality, and maybe I'll be into politics or maybe some opinionated field.
And switching parties.
Switching, yeah, exactly. So, someday I would be in some of the positions which will be influential enough that people will start digging into the internet what this guy said 5 or 10 years back, and that is when they will come in. You know what, this guy is saying this thing, but in 2026, this guy said this thing about this thing. Sack him now.
And then you'll have to delete your Twitter posts, your YouTube channel.
I would do the other thing. I would monetize it completely. I would be like, just come and subscribe the channel, and I still
to
have
found what triggered you.
exactly.
To find, sorry.
So basically, I am rage baiting people into politics as well now. So that's see, as long as I'm getting views, I'm a view paglu person. So
Viewstitute.
viewstitute. Whatever gets me views, I am ready to do that. But yeah, that is all what this entire conversation was about. Please check the other videos on this channel, share it with the people. We have already told about the other things. If you ever want to be a part of this conversation, there's an email on the channel detail page. You can connect with us. We can have like online conversation also that might have lesser logistical issues than what we are having right now or operational issues.